challenges here. We have one participant so far. You want to start?
Good evening. My name is Dr. Tracy Scanlon. I'm happy to be here with you this evening for our first official webinar, and it's entitled Reset and Restart, Easing Return to School Anxiety. Before we begin, I'd like to let everyone know that we have a Q&A element that you can use if you feel like there's some questions that you'd like to ask or information that you might seek. Please feel free to do that anonymously in the Q&A feature. As you see before you, it's our story, right? This is Outreach Teen and Family Services. We have a long and rich history in the community, and we offer lots of valuable services, and we like to think that we do that in an affordable, connected, educated, and responsive way. And we're very happy always to be of assistance to parents, to families, to children, and to teens. Our vision is that we want every child, teen, and family in the communities we serve to thrive. And so tonight, as I present this information to you, I'm the clinical director here. I would like you to understand that we decided to cover this topic because we have heard from so many people from very different places and different ages and stages that it's a little disconcerting to be thinking about going back to school at this point in time. Some kiddos haven't been in school since over a year and a half ago, or haven't been even inside the hallowed halls, the brick and mortar, right? But they've been online. And so I thought while I was gathering this information that I would also include what I think is really important information for parents about their own stress and their own worry, and not just concentrate on the student stress about returning to school post-COVID. I think it's also important that we differentiate between anxiety and stress. I don't think as a culture we do a very good job about talking about what stress really is. And so children don't really have an idea about what good stress is and what bad stress is. And I think we generally think of stress as negative when really when it's a non-threatening situation, stress is a motivator and it's a very positive thing. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll just move into some very basic tips and strategies for helping yourselves and helping your child or your teen to make the transition back to school. And if they're already back to school, they haven't been there that long, so some of these will still be very helpful for you. I'm going to move on to the first slide, and what I'd like to talk to you about is control, right? Well, and it's interesting because I'm a huge control freak. So I feel like I know a lot about control, right? Or the need or the feeling or the want that I have to keep the things around me in a certain order. But what we have learned, if we have learned nothing at all about from the pandemic, we have learned that life is very uncertain. Things are very uncertain. People are very uncertain. Circumstances can be very uncertain. Generally, I think most of us are uncomfortable when we feel uncertain about something. And I like to use the analogy that the yoga folks use about staying in the space when you feel uncomfortable. So if you've ever done yoga, you know that there are some very strenuous poses that are very difficult, that make your muscles ache and can make your limbs shake. And what the yoga instructors often say when they can see us grimacing and see the tension and see the jaw lock, they will say, you're just feeling uncomfortable. That's your body regulating and telling you that whatever you're doing right now doesn't necessarily feel comfortable. Stay in the space and hold the pose anyway. If it moves from a position of uncomfortable to painful, that's very different. And so I liken that to this stress that we're all sort of feeling mutually as we move back into the normal sort of flow of school. We're a little uncomfortable. We feel that we don't have a lot of control, but it doesn't have to be seen as distress. It's stress. It's an alarm. And it tells us, okay, this feels uncomfortable, and I should probably strategize differently to get rid of the discomfort. But you still have to stick in the space. And one of the ways that we do that, and I do understand completely that this is so much easier to practice, to preach than to practice. And I really do. I have to talk to myself about this all the time as well. But if we don't reconcile, right, if we don't decide to accept things as they are to the extent that they're not things that we are, they're not unethical and they're not illegal, right? They're not criminal. There's a lot of stress around going back to school. There's a lot of stress around to mask or not mask, to vax or not vax. The one thing we have here is our ability to control ourselves, not the school system, not the school district, not other parents, not even our children for the most part, our teens. So we have to really get into a space of reconciliation, acceptance. You can accept what's going on and still get strategic about it and develop tactics. But for all the tactics in the world, we have to plan. We know this. COVID has taught us that, to change our mind and to be flexible and to come up with a plan B, C, D, and whatever it's going to take. And that takes an attitude of willingness to adjust. In psychological rhetoric, they call that the growth mindset, which is really just sort of psychological terminology for being willing to go down the think positive route rather than the down the rabbit hole into catastrophic thinking. So since we know that change is likely, you, everything changes from day to day as COVID is, as it relates to COVID. It's inevitable. We're going to come up with a plan. It's probably going to change. We should also be sure to be upfront with our kiddos about that as well. Here's the plan for this week. Here's the plan so far. And then be ready and willing to adjust as we can. And one of my sort of favorite psychological gurus was a fellow by the name of Albert Ellis, who's a native Pittsburgher, by the way, very famous psychotherapist. He's no longer around, but he talked a lot about human distress coming from a position of being irrational. Now, that's not to say any of the feelings that we have are irrational, but they're not necessarily based in a realistic reality, right? And so he would say, your brain gets hijacked. You have a catastrophic thought. Well, you have a negative thought. You get some evidence in the environment that you're probably right. And then a catastrophe builds and your brain gets hijacked. And when our brain gets hijacked, we go into complete flight, freeze, or flight mode. And again, down the rabbit hole. So he would not so jokingly and pretty aggressively tell his audience and tell his clients that they should stop shooting all over themselves all of the time. And I did say shoulding, so no one, I did not say a bad word, right? But stop shooting all over yourself. You shoulda, coulda, woulda, and if you do that, so will your child. And it's inevitable that that's never going to be a good place to be able to recover from. So focus on what you can control. Go to the next slide. I know that in our culture these days, we love to throw around the term self-care. Most of us talk about it. Most of us preach it to the people that we love. Most of us don't bother to do it for ourselves. It's that whole thing about pulling the oxygen mask down before you pull your child's down, right, on the airplane. And we know none of us are probably going to do that either. But we have to be logical and planful here. So one of the strategies that you have to use is to keep in mind that you're no good to yourself, to your family, to the child that you're trying to support, to the community that you're a part of, if you're not whole and well. And there are really basic things that we can do to care for ourselves. We tend to exert a lot of effort to care for others and probably sometimes expect some of the care for ourselves to come from out there to us. But the best possible thing that we can do is basic stuff. And one of the things that we talk to our clients here about all the time is, basic routine. What you need to do is take breaks. You need to make sure that your sleep hygiene is ritualistic. And I cannot stress that enough. To have not just enough sleep, but quality sleep is going to provide you enough tenacity enough hardiness to make it through these stressful times. And one of the ways that you can sleep better at night is by taking breaks during the day, getting up and moving away from the screens, right? And not getting a singular focus about what's happening right now with this return to school. Another thing that I think is mutually important between both parents and adults and the children is to maintain social connections. I think so many people have talked to us about this. So many clients, so many parents have talked about being able to manage COVID, especially the lockdown part, the shutdown part, the isolation parts early on, by maintaining social connections in the most creative ways possible. No, we couldn't go for coffee, or we couldn't go and share a glass of wine, but you saw how many people came up with really ingenious ways of staying connected. Neighbors who sat in their driveways in their fishing chairs, and the other neighbor sat in their driveway, so you were socially distanced. I know as a parent myself, and I hear it here a lot at outreach, that one of the sort of tricks of the mind is that when we isolate and we sort of other ourselves as if we're alone and we're over here, we're the other people, that we get a disconnect between what's going on in the real world and how other people might be struggling with the exact same things. To me, it was miraculous when my son was young and I was nervous and I was scared about something, to hear another mother say, "Oh, yeah, I did that. I went through that." And it would suddenly bring me out of other into, oh, this is a tribal thing. This is a part of this being a parent, hardest job in the world kind of thing. Another issue is that people fail to ask for help when they need it. And I really I don't like to suffer in silence. I'm not a great sufferer in silence person. And so I access support where I can, when I can. And I'm not afraid to say I don't know and I need some help. And I think that takes a lot, especially for women in the American culture. Moms who are also working in the home and outside of the home, we like to believe we sort of have it all under control. And for the most part, we do. But a little help along the way is really important. And it helps to rally with people going through the same thing that you're going through. And lastly, it's just really important to be upfront with your student, your child, your teen, your young adult returning to college. Let them know that you're fallible and human and mortal too, and that you don't necessarily know all the rules of the game, and that sometimes that gets to you as well. I think that's a good way to model for them that they're allowed to say that too, and not only feel it, but to say it out loud and then ask for help. So those are just some basic parent self-care tips. Next, we'll move on to the tips for supporting your student, your child, your teen. I think, routine, routine, routine. And again, this is something we preach a lot, but I almost think you have to get ritualistic about routine when it has been disrupted to the degree to which it has for essentially the last 2 years, right? And so we want children to know from the very beginning, now that you're back in school, you're waiting for the school bus, you have 7 hours or 7.5 hours to sit in that uncomfortable seat, which my own son complained about right away when he went back to school. Things that just they were so used to doing and acclimated to that they're not at this point in time. Talk to them about their feelings, validate their feelings, but also set the tone very early. I talk with parents a lot. We do free parent consultations here when a mom or a dad or a family caregivers come in and they just want a little advice about restarting or resetting, because they feel like they've gotten off the path with their child. I think at this point, right now, you set the tone now. You be kind of rigorous about it and a little bit inflexible, which your child won't like, of course. And there's time to ease up. There's time to shift. There's time to become more flexible with the routine later. But right now, I think if we don't hold the line and we don't sort of draw the line in the sand and let the kiddos know this is how this is going to go. This is what time bedtime is going to be. It's different to be a virtual student than it is to sit in a classroom for 7.5 hours. There is limits to your physical prowess we just need to set up the routine and set the tone early. I think additionally, if your child hasn't returned to school, but even if they have already, it's really important to get the child or your children to get socially reconnected. And I mean that can, for younger children, that of course involves more parental involvement, right? Setting up play dates if you feel comfortable doing that, doing things that get your child re-engaged with the general public, but also with the folks that they think are a part of their typical social world. I've noticed, and so many of the therapists here at Outreach have commented on this to me, that with younger children, I'd say, the school age children up to middle school, there's been a real slide. Of course, we talk about the academic slide, and also folks talk about the COVID slide and the academic slide. However, so many of the middle school kiddos in about that age range have lost some of their ability to read social cues and to know how to interact and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, because when we're interacting over screens, that's very different than reading social cues and having a body sitting in a chair next to you and looking at someone's eyes to find out or how they're regulating or what their mood is like. So I think the sooner we get children back into safe, small, i I assume socially distanced connections, I think will build their confidence up. Another way to build the confidence is, again, back to this growth mindset, right? Think positively. We can share and maybe complain together about some of how our lives have changed. Um, but for the most part, life won't be what it once was. A student's school world won't be what it once was. It will be different. That's not better. That's not worse. It's just different. And so to think positively about that and to engender in them a spirit of willingness to allow for change, allow for flexibility, and to recognize change as something good and not something that is necessarily scary. Additionally, I think this is very important for younger children, but I think you're going to see this up through sixth and seventh and eighth grade as well for some students. It's really important to practice separating. It's really important before they're going to be gone from you 8 or 9 hours a day to start separating, practicing little small periods of separation and time when you are not there at the ready constantly with the snacks and the fixing the technology and the answering all of the questions. I mean, for goodness sakes, so much of the research now talks about pet anxiety, that our dogs, our companion animals, are showing signs of distress when we leave because they've become so accustomed to us being at arm's length. So especially for younger children, practicing separation early before they return and during the beginning of their return is really important. Again, for some students, and this may not go across the board, I mean, some students will return with zeal and gusto, and they will not have necessarily slid in any way or suffered in any kind of way. And hopefully so many children have not experienced the direct loss of folks through the virus. But we have to emphasize safety, because no matter how much we think that we are protecting our children from the media circus that is COVID-19, they hear it, they see it, they have access on an iPad. Goodness gracious, I saw a little boy the other day watching Inside Edition on his iPad, and that's all catastrophic kinds of announcements and very scary kinds of things. And so, be honest about it and talk about it, but don't just talk about the safeguards. Talk about their feelings about what they are actually worried about. Sometimes it's not about whether or not they get sick, it's about whether or not you get sick, or it's about whether or not someone they love is going to be in jeopardy. And that's just not something to poo-poo. Children around the age of 6 have come to a place where they understand death and dying and sickness in a whole new way, as in they know it's permanent. Of course, at 6, they don't have what we have cognitively. But by that age, they recognize that it's irreversible. And that's kind of a scary notion for a young person. So talk about the safeguards and talk about how far we've come, but also let them talk about what they really are afraid of. Again, I would encourage the children in the same way that I just did you to tell them to ask you for help, to tell them that they need should express when they need extra support in the classroom. I know everyone's had a very different experience of educators and school districts and school systems, but generally speaking, for me, I found, especially at the beginning and through COVID, that you know I was just honest and asked my child to be honest and say to the I'm struggling, and ask for more help and ask for more support. And yes, that is a burden on the system, and that's definitely a burden on our educators. But people that do that job are the first ones that are likely to want to help in an extra way for the most part. And so I would encourage you to sit down at the beginning before your child goes off to school or after the first full week and just hold your very own State of the Family Union address, your State of the Union discussion. What's working, what's not working, what could be tweaked, what wasn't expected, what wrench got thrown in. Did they know they had to have a lock for the locker? I mean, do they have extra masks in their bag? Sit down as a family, and you can do that in such discreet ways. It doesn't have to be something that will, garner a lot of, oh, I don't want to do this kind of responses. It's a family huddle. It can take 15 minutes. You'll get more, and you can do it sort of in a covert way, which I think you get a lot of information when your child's in the back seat and you're driving along, sort of minding your own business, and you toss back a question or you throw something out. You tend to there's not a lot of eye contact, so it's not intimidating, and they don't necessarily see it as an inquisition. So even if school has started, I would allow a week, maybe 10 days to go by, and then huddle. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. I shouldn't have written final thought at the top because it's a long final thought. So let me check my time here and see where we're at. Firstly and generally, you are not alone in this. Whether you believe your teacher or the teachers are your allies or not, they are there to do this work. Reach out, ask for help, and don't forget, your child has entitlements, right? And you have to be sure that they get put into place. There's a lot going on right now, and there will be a lot of balls dropped. There's no doubt about that. There is no chance in the world that we are all going to do this perfectly. The teacher is going to fail, the mommies are going to fail, the daddies are going to fail, the children may flail. That's okay. That's to be expected, right? Just get ready and willing to believe that that's the way life goes, and we're all going to be a little bit better off. As I've already said, we need to put our own oxygen masks on first. Got a lot of self-care at home, a lot of planning, a lot of prep. And that'll, I think that a lot of people are distressed and go into counseling or therapy for a very basic reason. And it's certainly not something that's pathological. We ask for help from professionals more often than not because we are struggling with a life adjustment issue. And if this isn't one of the bigger life adjustment transitions that we're ever going to make as a culture, as a community, as a country, then there will be nothing. So don't be afraid to recognize that you're being taxed in a whole new way. And it's like having enough money in your bank account all the time and being able to pay what you need to pay and knowing that you have control and that everything's going to be okay. But now COVID is costing us more. And it's taxing us more. And we didn't necessarily save up enough resources to deal with it head on every day in the same way successfully. So we're going to fall short, but some of the efforts are going to be for naught. Just try to embrace that. And I think the real final thought here, sort of the takeaway for me, for you, is to understand, read about, learn about, and preach self-efficacy, which we're going to talk about more on the next slide. Self-efficacy is a really interesting sort of phenomenon and terminology that gets used a lot in the education world and a lot in the counseling world. And generally speaking, I think most of us kind of know what it is, but I want to start by talking to you about what it isn't, because I think it's a little easier to understand that. And that there'll be some bullet points on the slide coming up. To be efficacious, right? To be one's own agent is not to be confident and competent only. I think what we like to do as parents is really build a child's esteem, which is hugely important. And I think we try to do that in really great ways. And sometimes we overshoot the mark, and sometimes we over focus on confidence. And then academically, we're always looking at competencies, right? What a child is likely to be able to succeed at. When it comes to self-efficacy, our job as parents is to teach our child to believe in the notion that they are capable, period. End of sentence. That they are capable, not that they are good at math, not that they can handle COVID, not these sort of overly general kinds of things, but certainly not just that your child is good at this, and this, but not that. I grew up believing I wasn't good at math and numbers. I'm not good at math and numbers. That was my experience. No teacher could convince me otherwise. And I never really conquered the anxiety or angst around that kind of thing. So I didn't feel myself capable. So I stopped striving. I stopped striving to reach that goal, or to incorporate that element into my world in a very positive way. So your child needs to know that they have efficacy, that when it hits the fan, when stuff happens, when they are up against it, they have what it takes, because what it takes comes from inside. It's not what the teacher necessarily said. It's not the clothing. It's not the socioeconomics. It's not the IQ. Goodness gracious, it's not whatever it says on all of the things that we check to make sure our students turned in their homework every day, and what their QPA is on a weekly basis. It is an internal sense, almost an instinct, that I've got it, this is rough, I can do it. And I've got some evidence from previous experiences that tell me, I might not make it perfectly, but I'll make it through this. And this and this and that forever and ever, right? And that's perseverance. So you build self-efficacy, which engenders a sense of agency. We want our children to be their own best agent, right? To be an agent on their own behalf. And one of the ways that we do that is by letting them fall down, do the wrong thing, make mistakes, and not fix it. I love to provide a cushy landing for my guy when he doesn't do well, because I can't see him suffer. I can't see him distressed. But I also know, because I've learned from really great teachers and principals, that me swooping in all the time is doing more harm than good, because it doesn't build efficacy. And then a child never acquires a belief that they're competent. So if they can't be competent, they have a longer reach for confidence, right? So when a child equates success to their internal factors, that leads them to believe, and it's true, that they have control over themselves. That's what we're talking about. And when we master control over ourselves, we do so much better mastering control over the environment. You know that as a parent. You know that when you feel in control of you, the flow around you is much better, and the people around you do better. Children develop a sense of mastery. Now, mastery is not perfection. It's a sense of self-mastery, that there's a lot of things that happen, and I've got this toolbox next to me, and I'm pretty sure there's a tool in that for everything that happens. So I'll probably be able to face it and deal with it and conquer it. And I might not do it perfectly, but I'll build it. I'll build some competence around it, and next time I'll do it even better. And I think when you add the competency part in when you're building self-efficacy. It's like a larger umbrella. The efficacy piece, teaching a child how to be their own agent, develops competency, which rises esteem and confidence, and generally speaking, builds a hardier whole human. So we're doing a lot of work here now, right, with the younger folks, so that they can be whole and hearty later. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. Oh, there isn't a next slide. Okay. Oh, it's in my notes. Here it is. I'm sorry. Okay, I wrote it, hand wrote it. So I was talking with a whole bunch of educators last week, and they wanted to know what's the key to succeeding and helping the kids when they get back to school. And I was like, I don't know. You would know. You're the experts, right? Because we like to look for a silver bullet. I mean, we want to know we have the ability to affect positive change, right? To control an outcome. So as a clinician myself, and as the clinical director here at Outreach, what the teens and the families and the counselors have taught me is that there are three elements that I think really are the key to, I guess we'd say, a whole well-lived life, right? Because we're always going to have distress, and there will be peaks and valleys. And happiness, by the way, isn't the end goal of life. Contentedness, probably closer to the right word that we should be using, but happiness is dynamic. You won't know real happiness if you haven't known sadness, right? And so, I don't think the message for our kiddos should be that, we want to go and conquer this year and in the end be happier and better than we ever were. Well, that's probably not reasonable or achievable. And I don't know that it's really building the best notion they have for what it means to be content, aka successful, whole. The three keys for me are relationships, negotiation, and grit. And I know in our world, we talk a lot about kids being resilient. I tend to rebel against that notion because I think we throw it out there too much. Kids are resilient. Lots of kids have parents that are divorced. Lots of kids have trouble in school, all that sort of stuff, right? But grit is really different and so much better than just talking about things in terms of being resilient. I liken grit to more of this sort of ongoing, growing hardiness. And I think sometimes when we talk about resilience, we talk about it being a one-time thing that we get to in the face of something challenging. But grittiness, what the research tells us at least, grittiness is the thing that carries a person through trials and tribulations and doesn't dampen their spirit. So we would want to build grittiness in our children, I think. So to me, and obviously I struggle as much as the next person, but I have learned, and I think I've been taught well in this environment of counseling, that if you can build relationships, that's not being in love with everybody you know. That's not being best friends with every kid in school. That's not loving your boss or your subordinate or the person in the cube next to you. But being able to be in relationship in a peaceful way with the people that you're confronted with every day is so much more important than being liked or liking everybody. Because if you can be in relationship, that means you can communicate. And if you can communicate, you can negotiate. And when we negotiate, we feel mastery. We feel like, okay, I have a way of expressing myself that honors what I truly believe. And this is what we want for our children, to teach them to express themselves in a whole way, in a real way, and not just dysregulated in a moment emotional way. That builds relationships with their teachers, with their peers, with everyone that they, even with the bully, or even with the kid they may not necessarily love a whole lot, right? So it sort of goes in order for me. It's relationships, negotiation, which has right under it good, viable communication skills, which then builds grit, hardiness. It helps children learn to persevere. It also teaches children, and I think this is really important now as they transition back in this kind of stressful time, right? That in the moment, those primal feelings, that dysregulation, that punch in the gut feeling, the tears that they fight back, those are all genuine and real and valid experiences. But the relationship, the negotiation, and the self-efficacy piece will teach them how to honor that without always necessarily needing to express it, release it in the moment. So those are my unsolicited, by the way, because they weren't on the slides. Of course, what I said to the teachers were, if there were a silver bullet, there'd be three little bullets, and it would be helping children to learn to build relationships with others in a serious way, in a very intentional way, especially right now as they transition back, and allowing them to know then that they can be confident enough to negotiate some of those relationships which then results in children persevering and being more hardy. And so I wish you all the best, all of your children, your young people, everyone that you care about that you know is in a period of transition right now, including yourself. We tend not to be ever so kind and gentle to ourselves and have an expectation of ourselves that is unreasonable. And, you know, a guru, I call him guru to make fun of him, but a therapist that I think is very brilliant that has taught me along the way has always reminded me when I'm talking about myself and my own inadequacies and my fears, that I certainly wouldn't talk to anybody I love or care about in those terms. So be kind and gentle to yourself, and remember that we're all in this together. And here at Outreach, we're here. We have never not been here through this entire ordeal. And I know because the children tell me and their counselors tell me, this is a good relationship place. And so I offer you our services, our consultations. We're a phone call away. It doesn't take much to get through to one of us. And I like to think we're pretty happy to help. So the information is in the slides. Our mission is way back in one of the earlier slides. Please get to know us better if you don't already, and look forward to other webinars and podcasts that'll be coming your way soon. Stay safe and take really good care, everyone.